Welcome. Thank you for clicking through to this video on my two-stroke diagnosis starting problems. I shall be listing here some key points that I always do, like a procedure, when I've got a problem starting a two-stroke engine. And I find that it works for me. I mean, it's worked for me over the last 25 years plus, and I hope it'll work for you. So if you decide to do what I've listed here, which is what I do, then I'm sure you'll get good results. Some things you will know already and others you may not. So I've put it in very basic format, and I have listed the key points here. So it isn't very visual. It's more about listing the key points here on this particular video, because I don't want to make it too exhaustive by going too in depth on each point. Just want to introduce these points to you. I can do videos on the points. They're all videos in themselves potentially, and I have got some videos already out there on some of them, and I will fill in the gaps for the rest, as I say. So I hope everything's okay here and that it helps you. So let's get started. So there we are. There's our list, and it might seem like a lot to you, but remember, you might not have to use all of these key points to get your machine working. There's just a long list there, just in case you need to keep going and going and going and trying new things. Some of these things you'll already know, as I've said. Some will seem so simple you'll wonder why I've even put them on, but I'll tell you now, the things I've put on here I have seen happen. So I've seen it's required basically. So let's just get started now. Okay, so we've come to our machine, and of course we've started the machine time and time again in the past, and we come to it now and it won't start. So we're pulling the pull cord and there's no starting of the engine. Well, the first thing I would do is a good visual check. Is there anything obvious there? Is there any loose wires you can see? Is there any fuel leakage? Is there any fuel pipes hanging down? Is there any kind of damage? That's the first thing I'd do, a good visual check. And then the next one, you'll probably wonder why I've added this, and I don't want it to alienate you, but it's happened to me loads of times, this has, I can assure you. Always check your on and off switch again, because quite often you could be starting and pulling the pull cord and somehow it sort of flicks to the off position and you can be pulling for ages. Believe me, I've done this and I've seen lots of apprentices do this, so that would be the next thing I check for. And then I'd just make sure that my throttle, because you quite often on a two-stroke you've got a mechanism that allows your throttle to open so far. Sometimes if that isn't open enough, your throttle butterfly isn't open enough, then it's hard to start, and sometimes you can't start the two strokes from cold. So just ensure that that throttle is open. The next one, the choke. Now, is the choke stuck open? If the choke is stuck in the open position and you actually think that you've put it in the closed position, so that in the start position that is, but sometimes it isn't and it's stuck open, and of course you won't get enough fuel to air ratio to go in there. You need more fuel than you do when the engine's warm, and that's what the choke's for, of course. If it's stuck open you won't get enough in to start it from cold. So just check that your choke isn't stuck. And I'd just check the spark plug cap first now, before I check the spark. I'd just make sure that the spark plug cap was pushed down enough, because believe me, in the past I've had it where the spark plug cap looks like it's on the actual spark plug okay, but it's slightly off, lifted, and not allowing the electrical current going from the HT lead into the spark plug. So I'd just push down, make sure that wasn't a problem, and then I'd make sure that there was no damage to the HT leads or anything loose there, or any damage to the cap itself, any cracks in it. And then I'd take the spark plug out and earth it out onto the body of the barrel of the engine, and then I would turn over the engine just to make sure there's a good spark. If there was, all well. If not, I'd replace the spark plug. And the next thing I'd do is I'd have a look at the fuel pipes in much more detail. I'd make sure there was no leaks or cracks in the actual fuel pipes itself. I'd actually go from the fuel tank and follow right down and have a look all the way to the carburetor, just making sure I'm looking in real good detail there, that there's no loose pipes and there's no damage to any of them, and obviously replace if necessary. Now, believe it or not, more than one occasion I've come across the carburetor is slightly loose. It isn't actually it's bolted on, but it's not tight enough, and it's created a gap between the carburetor and the engine body, and that's allowed air to go in, altering the air to fuel ratio. So the next thing I normally check is I just, with my two fingers, just grab the top and the bottom of the carburetor and just see if there's any lift movement side to side, up and down. If there is, obviously it seems like the carburetor would be too loose. So I just check that. Also, I just check the actual screws or the bolts themselves that hold the carburetor on, just to make sure they're tight enough. So that's another thing I'd just look for before I start it. And then I'll take the air filter cover off and have a look at the air filter for as long as it takes. It doesn't take long at all, just to pop the air filter cover off just before we start it. Take the air filter out and give it a tap or something like that, see if any dust comes out or whether you can noticeably see any dust. But I always clean them anyway. I'll just clean them out with a bit of paraffin, something like that, or proper cleaner, and then blow it out with an airline or something like that, and then I'll put that back in. If it needs replacing, I'll do that. But I'll always check the air filter first, and whilst the air filter's out, you can normally see down through the carburetor's venturi, and just have a look down there to make sure nothing obvious is wrong there. If something's broken and it's hanging around there, anything like that, just that there's no blockage or something. So then we can move on. And then I'll reach into the tank with some long nose pliers or something like that, anything I can reach the fuel filter with, and take the fuel filter out and just check that that isn't blocked. They can block if they're standing over winter. It's quite common in that way, but ultimately the job of a filter is to filter out crud, and they're going to get blocked. That's the whole point of them. So I always check that, always, before I try and start as well. So I'll take that out, and what I do is I dry it slightly, then try and blow through it. If I can't blow through it, or it's difficult to blow through, it's very full of crud, of course, but I'm not telling you to blow through it. That's what I do. So you can either try blow through it with an airline if you wish, or just replace it if you think it needs it. But fuel filter does need to be checked. One thing I want to mention at this point now is that when I actually undid the fuel tank cap to take out the fuel filter, it's important there to notice when the fuel cap's unscrewed whether there's like a hissing noise, because if there is, it could mean, and this is where the next point comes in, it could mean that the fuel tank isn't venting. Assuming that everything's okay, at this point we could probably start the engine and it would probably run. But if not, then this is where we'd go into next. We'd look at the fuel tank now, but if there was a tss, then we'll move on to the next point. And so on the subject of fuel tank venting then and the hissing sound, you can normally find, and it's normally in the actual fuel tank cap itself, as a one-way valve which allows air in to the fuel tank when fuel is leaving the fuel tank to go into the engine, because if not, then it's going to draw a vacuum there, and that vacuum will prevent the fuel going into the engine any further. So that's why it needs a one-way valve there, allowing air in to come on top of the actual fuel to fill that space inside the tank. So if you've got a problem there with the hissing as you open the fuel tank cap, or it's worth checking anyway, just check that that is working okay, that little one-way valve's working okay. And you can, I think you can replace a lot of these if you actually talk to a dealer, and it's well worth doing so if you suspect this is the problem. So replace if necessary, or at the very least clean it out. It could be blocked. I had one once. I had a chainsaw that wasn't venting, and what I found inside it was hard to see. It was a tiny little piece of wood chipping that had gone inside the vent itself. It had gone inside the little tiny one-way valve, and it could hardly be seen. It was less than wasn't much more than a few millimeters, but it was stopping the venting. So I just pushed all that out. I took it to pieces, the actual vent itself, the actual little one-way valve. I took it out of the actual cap of the actual cap, and then I pushed it through with a little pick, so it came out the other side, and then blew through it with the airline quite gently because I didn't want to damage it, but then it worked absolutely fine after. So do check that, it's well worth it.
And if we've got no joy there, I'll check the fuel itself. Now, fuel does have a shelf life. The actual reactive component of the fuel only lasts so long, and then it goes and evaporates into the environment. It's the reactive part of the fuel that combusts in the engine. Now, if they always say that fuel lasts around a month to 6 weeks, and I kind of agree with them. I have actually, though, had fuel that's lasted months and months and months, 6 months or more, and been okay. But then again, I've had fuel that's only lasted just a few weeks. So this one's open to question slightly, but I do still replace the fuel if I've got to this stage and I've had no joy. So I definitely do at this point anyway. So check your fuel, and if it doesn't smell like fresh fuel, we know what fresh petrol smells like. If it smells a little bit stale or it not so strong, then we do need to replace it. You'll probably know anyway how long that fuel has been in there, so you'll have a good idea as to whether you need to replace it or not. You'll know whether it's been in there generally more than 6 weeks or so. Again, if we're getting no go there, then I would look at the mixture screw settings, the 2 screws that you tune the carburetor up with. At this stage, this is probably where I'll look at those. I know some carburetors have one adjuster setting and some have 2. Now, I have got videos on YouTube showing you how to adjust those in the 1 setting and the 2, but generally what I'll do is I will turn both screws all the way in, and then I'll turn the H or the high screw out 1 full turn, and the low or the L screw out 1.5 turns, and then I'll try again to start it. Generally that's normally okay. You might think, well, why would the settings be off? Well, someone might have tried to get it going before, especially if it's not your strimmer or your whatever kind of engine it is. So if you reset them and you know where you stand, you've got more control over this, and then you can try and start it again. But please be aware that the threads on these little screws can be quite fine, so try not to screw them in too tight in case you strip the threads. And believe it or not, the next thing I usually do is look at the exhaust. Now, the exhaust can get blocked, particularly if the engine previously has been running quite rich with fuel, so more fuel than air that is required. So what can happen is a lot of carbon can build up inside the exhaust, in the engine as well, but in the exhaust. And I normally take the exhaust off, so I unscrew the exhaust, take it off and give it a knock and see if I can get any carbon out there, see if there's any in, or look in with a torch or something like that. And also there is a little spark arrestor, like a little metal gauze in a lot of these little 2-stroke engines, and that can get blocked with carbon, even if the main part of the exhaust doesn't. This little gauze filter, it's like a little gauze spark arrestor. It's not very big. It's only like an inch square in some of them. And if that's blocked, it can stop the starting of the engine itself. Or if it does start, it won't run very well like that. So just check that. It's normally at the front. There's a separate bolt or a separate screw to open, which will uncover that. So that needs to be checked. And whilst I've got the exhaust off, I will look inside the exhaust port. Through the exhaust port there, you'll see whether that's blocked with carbon, and you can get the carbon out with a screwdriver or something like that there, being very careful not to touch the piston. And also you can, as I've just mentioned, you can see in and you can see the piston and the barrel. So you can move the engine, you can turn the engine so that the piston's going up and down. You can see it going up and down there through the exhaust port. And what you're looking for there as the piston comes up is to make sure that there's no scoring marks or any wearing marks on the piston. And as the piston goes back down, you can see through and to the back of the barrel or the pot and see if there's any scoring marks there on the other side, on the barrel or on the pot, or any wear marks. So that's what you're looking for there, because any wearing or any scoring will reduce obviously the compression of the piston in the barrel, and it won't start. Depending on how bad that is, depends on whether it will start or not, or whether it will start and run like a box of frogs. But what you're looking for there is the wear. Okay, just before I start now, just before I try and start it again, what I like to look for,
just while I'm in the process of things, is I like to check the crankshaft bearings or the main bearings, because if the crankshaft bearings are no good, then neither will be the crank seals, and it will not run if the crank seals aren't holding pressure. A two-stroke will not run if that's not the case. So what I do is I like to take off the recoil cover away so it exposes the flywheel, and then I hold the flywheel and move it up and down and side to side to see if I can feel any movement. If I can feel any movement up and down or side to side, that means that those main bearings, there's play in them and they're worn, and that movement is going to stop the efficiency of them main seals to hold a nice compression inside the engine there, and it will not run. So that needs checking. If that's all okay, I will then try and start the engine again, and let's assume it's okay. We're okay, no problem. But if not, I'll go that bit further now with the carburetor. But I would like to add though that if there is play in these main bearings, then the more budget side two-stroke engines, it isn't really economically viable to repair them. I mean, you can buy nowadays an edge cut or a strimmer for less than £100, and it would certainly cost more than that if you had that sent into a repair centre to get that fixed. So on the more expensive two-strokes, like some of the high-end Husqvarnas, Stills, etc., yes, then it is worth having it repaired. But at this point, if there is play there, I've scrapped machines on the budget side before, because as I say, it just isn't worth doing them for your money. Okay, so we're coming back to the carburetor again. So we've tried to start the engine, it's not starting. Okay, so the first thing I do now, we've actually, in the procedure above, we've actually tried to move the carburetors with our two fingers, and that's nice, and let's imagine that's nice and tight. So the carburetor's fixed to the side of the engine, okay, and the gaskets are okay and everything else like that. What I normally do now is, you've got two sides to the carburetor. You've got a fuel pump side with a lid, and you've got a metering side with a lid. So what I normally do now is, at this point, I check both of them lids. So let's imagine we're checking the fuel pump lid first, because there's one single screw that goes and holds those on, and this is on the fuel pump lid. There's one single screw there, and sometimes I've known that to come loose, and it's loosened the lid, and of course that's allowed fuel to leak and air to be drawn into the carburetor. Now you might say, well, we checked for leaks, but sometimes if it's not loosened too much to allow fuel out, but it sucks air in, I've known that before as well. So it's always best then just to get your finger and check, just to see if that lid moves slightly, and also probably better to try and tighten it up and just see if it is tight. It's normally a Phillips screw driver we need for that. And as I've just mentioned, that's moved us on to the other side of the carburetor, the metering lever lid or the metering lid. Just make sure that's tight again, because we've got similar problems there that can occur. Just make sure on this one we've got normally got four screws there that need to be tightened, and if they aren't tightened just nicely pinched up tight, then we're going to get problems again. Obviously don't over tighten these are very small screws, but just make sure they are nicely pinched up. At that point, I normally try and start it again. If there's no go again, I normally remove the carburetor to check the fuel pump diaphragm. Now, basic procedure is remove the carburetor, remove the fuel pump lid that we just spoke about, and then check the diaphragm. Take the diaphragm out and check it for any cracks, any splits, or whether it's deformed or disfigurement in any way. So we need to do that. That's vital. Now, they do need replacing from time to time. And if you've had a two-stroke for long enough, I can guarantee that you've had to replace these in the past, or whoever's owned the two-stroke before you, or whatever. But you need to check that and replace if necessary. And also, whilst you're checking that, check the gasket. There's a gasket there that also sits above. It's on top of the fuel pump diaphragm. That gasket has to be okay, no splits, no disfigurement, because that's also helping to keep that vacuum in there
so that nothing can be drawn in that shouldn't be drawn in, no air. And of course replace if necessary. Okay, moving on to the metering lever side then. I'll turn the carburetor the other way up, and just in the same way we've sorted out the issue with the fuel pump diaphragm. When we're tending to the metering diaphragm, we remove the lid and take the metering diaphragm out. The metering diaphragm is on top of the gasket this time, so we take the metering diaphragm off and then the gasket. Check that metering diaphragm. If there's any, hold it up against the light, see if there's any holes through it. We don't want it leaking through there at all, so we don't want it to lose any vacuum, because it relies on vacuum to run properly. There relies on the vacuum that the actual carburetor creates, and then it pulls down on the diaphragm, does the vacuum, it draws on it to allow the normal workings of the carburetor. I have actually got a video on showing about that, but what we must make sure is that it doesn't look prune-like, so it doesn't look like it's gone all prune, just like your fingers go in if you've been in the bath too long, like prune-like. Just make sure it doesn't look like that. If it does, it's got to be replaced straight away. It won't be doing its job efficiently. Also, just make sure you check the gasket as well. Make sure there's no splits or anything like that, or any disfigurements anywhere. And then of course replace if necessary. And whilst you've removed the metering lid and the diaphragm and the gasket, you'll expose the metering lever. The metering lever's there, and it sort of tilts backwards and forwards. And you'll see it down there, a little silver lever. Just make sure there's no cracks in that, or it's not split. I have seen cracks and splits in these, and that's prevented me from starting engines. Now you might say, well, how do they get cracked and split? Well, they do, because they're being used all the time. They're used backwards and forwards, and they're always on the go. These are when the engine's running, so they do split. I've seen them. And there's also a setting for the back of the lever that's got to be just right. It's normally level with the carb body. Not always, but normally level with the carb body 99% of the time. So just make sure that's okay. And the metering spring, I've had to replace a few of these. Very important. It's what holds the metering lever up at the back and down at the front, which creates a nice seal to stop any fuel coming through and regulates the fuel. Now if that is leaking, or it's not leaking, but if it's weak and it's allowing leaking, then it could flood the engine, and that's why you can't start the machine. But it's vital that that little spring, I mean, we're going through this now systematically, and we're going through it in detail, and if you do all these checks, the chances are you'll be able to get this machine running. So I always check those. Whilst I've gone this far, I may as well check that little metering spring. If it looks disfigured, if it looks out of shape when you've taken it off and you're looking at it and it's not perfectly straight, or it looks like it's not got any springing efficiency, so it's gone weak, then it needs to be replaced. You can get these in kits. So you've normally got a spring, a lever, and a few other things in a kit, so you can replace that if necessary. And of course, if you've gone this far and you've taken off the metering lever, then the metering needle, you'll see there the lever is actually attached to the metering needle, and you can slide it out of the metering needle, and you can take the metering needle out. Now I always check the metering needle. I've gone this far, so I'm going to check everything. So I'm checking the metering needle now, and I always look on the end of the metering needle. That's the sealing end, and normally that's rubber. Not always, but normally that's rubber. And if it is rubber, you'll see it's like an orange looking rubber, or sometimes a black looking rubber. And if you can see on the end of there like a rim where it's been touching the actual seat, then it normally needs replacing. We normally replace them when they get like that, because if there's any leak backs, it's going to cause problems. So just check your metering needle, and if you need to replace it again, they're in the kit. If you buy a kit for that particular carburetor, you'll find that you've got all these bits in there anyway, and you may as well just replace them. So replace if necessary. And so by this stage, really, we've got the carburetor quite stripped down now, and at this stage what I do, you'll see all those little holes, all those little fuel holes there that I've got, all those little fuel veins coming through there. What I normally do is I get a an airline and I'll blow through all of them just to make sure there's no crud in them little fuel veins. I like to put the carburetors in an ultrasonic cleaner because it loosens up any crud inside those little fuel veins first, and then when you come to blow them out after that, then obviously you're probably going to be a lot cleaner, aren't you? Because you can force more crud out because you've loosened all that crud first. So preferably then use an ultrasonic cleaner followed by an airline to blow through those fuel veins, and then then you're going to be really clean. And we've got the carburetor stripped down this far, so we may as well do the full lot. So what I do now is I remove those core plugs. You'll see the core plug, it's next to the metering lever. It's a little round silver plug, and those are made of like a soft metal, like a aluminium generally, and they can be you can normally push a pick through them and lever them out, or very gently go through it with a very fine drill, and then you can put a pick through the drill hole and flick them out. That's the way I normally do them, obviously being very careful. And what I've done in the past is I've taken them out with carburetors I just can't get going, and I've found beneath there loads of crud, loads of dirt, because what you'll find underneath there are two more, or one, or at least one more fuel hole. That's what it will unearth. And after cleaning that fuel hole and cleaning the crud out there, I've managed to get carburetors going that I wouldn't have done normally, that I definitely wouldn't have done normally. So it's always worth taking those core plugs out. Some people call them Welsh plugs, some people call them core plugs. So it's worth doing that because you've got this far, and normally if you've bought a good service kit for your carburetor, you'll normally have Welsh plugs in there for that particular size, so you'll normally be okay. As I say, there is a procedure of taking these plugs out and putting new ones in. I will probably do a video on that very soon, because we do have to be careful how we do that, and we have to put them in just so again, using a certain resin, and it's well worth doing. But for now, what I would do now from here on, I would rebuild the carburetor, I would attach it back to the machine, I would build it up, as I say, and I would try it. And 99.9% of the time, you can normally get a two-stroke going if you've gone that far. In fact, when I service a two-stroke, I always go this far. I do all of them procedures there because I know that if I've took the time, just an extra, I know, an hour or something like that, an extra hour or so, if I've taken the time to do that, I know that when I come to use that two-stroke engine, when I come to use that machine, I know it's going to be okay. 99.9% of the time, it's not going to give me any more headache. I can just use it and it runs brilliantly. There's always exceptions, but generally the rule is you take the time and do all these procedures here and really go into detail, as I've said, and really care for the engine. You'll get back what you've put in. So, but for now then, I hope that this has been of use to you, and I've made it like this so you can print this list off and probably take it into the garage, into the workshop, whatever. I realise some people will already know this knowledge. Some people will think it's very basic. It's for the complete novice. It's for someone who is just starting out or just wants a refresher or something like that. Okay, so I hope all's well, and I will be back soon. Thank you so much for clicking through.